Thank you so much for your recent feedback on our weekly nourishment and the newsletter, etc. It's important that we keep on getting feedback because we want it to be somewhat interactive, this whole process. That's the very reason why all those months ago that we decided that we wouldn't stream the Mass, but we would have this hopefully more and more interactive prayer. It was a tough old question last week, I think. Who is Jesus for you? And I guess that from your responses, I got a sense of, well, it's different from different times. And that's the way it is, isn't it? Not wanting to leave that question totally aside, but let's move on to this weekend's readings. And holy dooly, we can no longer ever say that the Old Testament is totally boring. Did Jeremiah really say that? Or was Rebecca making it up? Perhaps go back and have another listen. That's one of the advantages of this videoing, isn't it? Have you ever spoken to God in that sort of language, that sort of way? I've yelled at God sometimes, and it's on those occasions that God seems to be saying to me, yeah, good on you, you're really fair income today. Have you noticed for yourselves that when you are intimately talking to God, that God becomes, for us Aussies, an Aussie? God so wants a relationship with us that he wants us to be real in our prayer. The gospel too is pretty violent in its language. Jesus saying, "Get behind me, Satan." We noticed that last week Peter was a rock of foundation. Very quickly he turns into a great big rock, a stumbling block. In the gospel also Jesus says to us to take up our cross and follow him. Well, I think Jesus will be saying to you and me at the moment, you don't have to take up a cross. You've got enough crosses to cope with the variety of ways in which this coronavirus is playing out, particularly for us lockdown number 4 Melburnians. The readings also got me thinking about, and you may wish to come along with me and ask yourself this question, got me thinking about how do I respond to someone who tells me bad news. You see, that first reading, Jeremiah, just to go back and give a bit of context, Jeremiah has been told by the Lord to go and tell the king, don't be stupid, don't try and overthrow the Babylonians. The Babylonians, the superpower at the time, had conquered Jerusalem, murdered the king, thrown out lots of people, destroyed the temple, and put in a new king whom they thought was safe. However, the new king got ahead of himself and he thought, oh, I'm big now, I can overthrow the Babylonians. Jeremiah had to go and tell that poor man, don't do it, it's only going to cause more disaster. Well, the king didn't like that bad news, and he and his courtiers had him thrown into prison, Jeremiah into prison, had him put in locks and stocks, and had rotten tomatoes and eggs thrown at him, etc., etc. He was a laughingstock for many weeks. But back to the question, how do I respond to people's bad news? It's a fine line, isn't it, between keeping up hope and understanding that people may not be quite rational in the midst of their shock and bad news, receiving bad news. Folks, please, let's make sure that our first response isn't a change of subject. A woman was telling me during last week that she told a mutual friend of ours that her husband was very sick and was possibly going to die. And the response was, oh, I had a great game of golf this morning. In the cold light of day, this is a ridiculous response, but in fact it is a shock denial response, isn't it? In retrospect, it's probably no more stupid than Peter telling Jesus, "You mustn't allow yourself to suffer grievously at the hands of the chief priests and the elders." Shock and denial sometimes is our response to bad news, people telling us bad news. How do we get in with the pain and shock of another without denying it or arguing against what people are saying? Also, how do we offer hope? How do we not get so down in the pit with someone else's bad news that we make it even worse? How do we keep hold of that rope of hope to help rescue the sufferer from their cave of pain? When might it be appropriate to offer them that rope? When might it be appropriate for you? I'm sorry, I don't have your answer. When I was at the Austin Hospital all those years ago, we were told and recommended to practice responses to people's bad news. May I pass that on to you? Reflect, think about it, perhaps even test it out. Pretend that you're hearing bad news and respond. St. Paul, in the second letter today to the Romans, perhaps has something of a movement towards the response. When he says, "Do not model yourselves on the behaviour of the world around you, but let your behaviour change, modelled by your new mind. This is the only way to discover the will of God and know what is good, what it is that God wants, what's the perfect thing to do." That all sounds pretty heavy, doesn't it? And furthermore, if you have been frustrated that we are still confined to 5 radiuses, well, relief is at hand, folks. The tour starts on Saturday night. For 21 glorious days, we shall be able to have a virtual tour around France and not even have to get on a plane. How good's that?